Hello there everyone, Lars here with a Writer's Rant, brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends, and something that just grinds my gears is when people just, they write this romance that is good, it's honestly good, it's going somewhere, and then they drop it. They drop it for no good reason. And it happens way more often than you would think, where a romance is being built up, characters are getting together, and we see how they are developing as individuals and as a couple, and then it just ends. One of the most egregious examples of this happening, and really is full of egregious examples in of itself, is Star versus the Forces of Evil. How many relationships were killed off screen? I mean, when we look at Marco Diaz, Marco's relationship with Jackie just kind of killed off screen. Marco's relationship with Halicruz just nipped in the bud before it could go anywhere. That was a really fun relationship. At the very least, explore more of what they're like as friends. No, we're even going to drop that. And, oh my gosh, Marco and Kelly. That was a sweet relationship. Why did you kill it off? And you killed it off screen. And then, Tom, you were done so dirty, my dude. I loved Tom's character. He was such a great character. He was a character who proved that he didn't need romance to be awesome and to develop, but when he began having a good, healthy relationship with Star, that was so precious, and that was just annihilated without really any sort of context, pretext, or anything. It was simply because the showrunners wanted Marco and Star to get together, and so all these other relationships that they spent genuine time with and actually meant something, they just killed. But yeah, it's not just with Star versus the Forces of Evil. It's happened to plenty of other stories, and especially it's something that you see happening in novice writers' works, where they want to create some sort of angst. They want to create some romantic subterfuge or some sort of whatever. And effectively what happens is they've got two characters that they intend to get together, but because they need some drama, they create two or three other characters that will come on in and mess around and everything like that. A relationship will be built up, and then it won't go anywhere. It will be completely forgotten, or it will just be annihilated without any sort of real context, simply because this relationship had to be there as an obstacle for our OTP to get together. And you know it when you see it. It's so clumsy. It's so bad. And it's ultimately just, it's really, really frustrating, because if you're going to spend that much time with these characters, and if you're going to get the audience emotionally involved and invested in the lives of these individuals, if we're really supposed to care about them, and if they end up happily together ever after, well, there needs to be some payoff. And if you want to have a bumpy road, that's totally fine. In fact, I kind of encourage that as an author, but it still needs to make sense. You can't just simply, throw people off to the side like chopped liver. Why? Well, because that just sucks. It's a horrible thing to do, and honestly, it's a waste, and you lose audience investment. If you do it too many times, nay, even once, you already begin to lose people because they're not sure if you yourself, as the author, are actually invested in creating a good romance. So in this Valentine's month, let us consider, what can we do with relationships that are built up that are suddenly left on the wayside? Well, there's a couple of things that we need to consider. Number one, is this relationship there to serve as an obstacle for the main couple to get together? Number two, is this something that you just kind of came up with because you were having fun and you wanted to experiment and see where you could go with this? And then number three, did you just lose interest along the way? Now then, there's probably a whole bunch of other things that we could say or do or speculate about this particular scenario, but I want to focus on these three. Number one, if you created a character or created a scenario that's meant to be an obstacle because the boy or the girl decide to go with someone else rather than the one that they're meant to be with, well, what you have to do is you have to properly build up this rival relationship. It has to be meaningful. It has to be something that draws the audience in to make them think, hey, you know what? This could actually work. and I don't want it to work, or I do want it to work, so that way you can have that good drama going on. I think one of the best things that was actually done by Stephenie Meyer in her Twilight Saga, even though I'm not a huge fan of love triangles, was that it made a whole lot of sense about why Bella would want to either be with the werewolves or with the vampires. It honestly did. Go Team Jacob, if I had to choose a side. Really? Let me clue you in on something right here. Team Charlie. All the way. Bella better be listening to her dad. Charlie deserves all the respect and love in the world. He's a fantastic character. Let Charlie have his cake and eat it too. But yeah, coming back to it. If you're going to create a rival romance, it really needs to mean something. It really needs to mean something to the audience. It needs to mean something to the characters. And you then need to explain within story why this relationship won't work, or why it's an obstacle for the others to overcome. And really, there's a whole lot that you can do with this scenario that can pay off very, very well if you give it some good thought and let things play out. It does require some time. You do have to invest time into it, but it can work. So now for scenario number 2, if you are just being experimental with this potential relationship right here, if that's honestly what you were doing, if you were just experimenting with these characters and their feelings and throwing out different scenarios, then it has no place in your final product. That's the kind of stuff that you do as you are working on your first draft, maybe your second draft, probably better yet with your notes on the side. And I have done that actually with my own characters, where I've asked myself, honestly, wait a second, do I actually want so-and-so and so-and-so to get together? How would that actually work? Play it out a little bit. Okay, well, there's this other character who would work out really well. Let's play around a little bit here. That experimental phase is absolutely fine. I highly encourage it. You will discover some pretty amazing things, and it might completely change the trajectory of your story and your characters, and maybe even for the better. But you do not want all of that experimentation to be splashed across the pages of your story unless, and this is something that most novice writers cannot pull off well, unless you're trying to make an organized, chaotic story. Very few people can pull it off, and quite honestly, it gets even messier when it comes to romance, and usually it causes way more heartache on the part of the reader than is warranted, and once again, you can very easily lose your audience because they wonder if you even know what you're doing. So, I highly recommend that if you just want to be experimental, that you keep that in the drafts that you do not intend to release as the final product. Now, let's finally talk about what happens if you just lose interest in the relationship that you're building up. And again, this is something that happens way more often than we probably care to admit, that we have this great idea in mind for who our characters could end up with if we want to do romance, and then we come to realize, you know what, maybe they're better off alone. In fact, in some cases, that's probably best for everyone. In other cases, we begin to realize, you know what, maybe this person would actually end up better off with someone else. Or in some cases, you say, you know what, romance is fun and everything, and I do like this relationship, but the plot is way more important than the romantic lives of these characters. And so for whatever reason, you start going off and doing other things within the story, and the romance is kind of left off to the side. It peters out, and it's just kind of, well, there, but you're not doing anything with it. You've lost interest, or your focus is somewhere else, and it just kind of dies. This happens a whole lot. I run into this a surprising amount of times in manga where a relationship is teased, they don't do anything with it, and then at the very end of the mangaka suddenly realizes, oh yeah, I was actually doing something with that. Well, they're together now. Ha ha. Okay. No! Show us it. Show us how this relationship develops. Actually do something with it. If you lose interest along the way, well, you have to then ask yourself, is this romance even worth it then to keep it around? Is it actually that important? And the reason why it's very, very crucial that we as writers are cognizant of these kinds of things is because relationships must be alive. They must be active in order for them to work. If you write a relationship, there must always be some sort of development happening for that couple or for those people in order for it to feel alive and feel like it's progressing. The moment that it ceases to progress, the audience ceases to care about that romance, or they grow very frustrated because they care so much. And when there's just nothing going on with it, well, then kind of what was the point? And if you then cobble it all together at the end because you remembered it, oh boy, well, it comes across as very disingenuous, and it's a hollow victory for the people who wanted that relationship to work out, because you didn't fully explore it. You didn't give it enough spice. You didn't give enough room to breathe. You didn't give it enough heart. And that's really disappointing to see. When we write our stories, we want our stories to feel full of life and energy. We want to be able to love every chapter that we write. If you don't, well, then it better be a very passionate hatred that you kept that one on in there, because you know it works, because readers can tell when you lost interest. And I've had people tell me that before. I can tell when you lost interest with what you were writing. And then it picks up again. And it's such an embarrassing thing to hear, but it's a very real thing to hear. And for romance, something that people buy into so much, well, it deserves our heart and our attention. So if you're losing interest, then maybe you need to go back and you got to kill some darlings. Maybe you have to remove it, or you got to bite the bullet and give it the heart it deserves, because really, that's what any good romance needs in order for it to be alive. So that's kind of my starting advice right here for dealing with these kinds of relationships. The relationships that just get left to the wayside or are never really completed without really any explanation as to why that is. And I've got 2 other videos coming out later where I'm going to explore some relationships that I, as a fan, was very much invested in that just kind of came to an end. And I want to have a look at why they ended and why it's important to note that this was probably a failure on the part of the creators, even if I as a fan still really enjoy those stories. Even though I'm diving in and being critical doesn't mean I didn't enjoy these stories, but I am going to get critical. I'm going to look at why this happened, why it failed, and how it could have succeeded for the series' betterment overall. For those 2 videos, I'm going to be looking at Ichigo and Rukia from Bleach, and Finn and Huntress Wizard from Adventure Time. I'm going to be coming out with those very soon, so you can look forward to that. If you're interested, please subscribe and hit the bell so that way you'll be notified for when those videos drop. And if you're looking for more writing advice, please check out our other videos here on YouTube. You can also check out our podcast, Camille's Harem, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We would love for you to check out some of our writing exercises at our Pinterest page. And of course, if you wish to be part of our community, those links are also available to you down in the description. Thank you for joining us on this adventure that we call writing. Until the next video, y'all, make sure you write those romances well. I know it's hard, but you can do it! And tschüss.